Hello and welcome back to Kim Reads as we continue with Molly's Surprise. Chapter 4, The Merry McIntyres. Keeping Dad's secret did not go any easier for Molly. She was jittery all day Saturday. After breakfast, when Brad rushed to the garage to get a sled, Molly planted herself like a guard at the bottom of the stairs to the storage room. Jill rolled her eyes and hissed, "Move away!" Molly wouldn't budge. What if Brad went up to the storage room? What if he saw the box? But Brad was only interested in the sled. He didn't even notice Molly. There was an alarm after lunch when Ricky went to the garage to get his snow shoveled. Molly hovered around him so much, Ricky finally gave her a shovel and told her to help out. Molly didn't mind shoveling the driveway. At least she could keep an eye on the garage without looking suspicious that way. By the end of the day, Molly was exhausted. The secret-keeping business was hard work, and there was one whole day to get through. One more nerve-wracking day until she and Jill could reveal the surprise. The next day was Christmas Eve. Even Molly was on pins and needles all morning. Luckily, Mom was up in her room until noon wrapping presents. She couldn't see the garage from there. And Ricky and Brad built a snow fort in the yard. They spent the morning cheerfully bombarding each other with snowballs. At last, it was time for everyone to get ready to go for the church for the Christmas Eve service. As Molly put on her special green velvet dress, she felt relieved. The secret would be safe while they were in church. Molly loved the Christmas Eve service. The church was decorated with red and white poinsettias and garlands of pine and holly. A dark manger scene filled the scene of the church. Everyone was given a small white candle to hold. The flame of Molly's candle flickered and danced as she listened to the words of the Christmas story. And suddenly there was the angel, a multitude of heavenly hosts, praising God and saying, "Glory to God in the highest, and on earth peace, good will toward men." Molly knew that everyone in her family was thinking about Dad and hoping Christmas would truly bring peace on earth so he could come home. Maybe next Christmas Dad will be with us, thought Molly. She remembered how deep the voice sang out, "Silent night, holy night." Molly looked down at the pew. She saw a tear felt like a tiny diamond in the corner of her mother's eye, shining in the light of the candle. Molly bit her lip. "Maybe we should have told her about the box," she said. "Maybe then she wouldn't be so sad." But then when they were walking home from church, Mom seemed happy. Their neighbor calls of "Merry Christmas" were warm in the snappy cold night. They had their supper of scrambled eggs, bacon, hot chocolate, and cinnamon toast before they hung their stockings on the mantel. Mom read, "'Twas the night before Christmas," just as Dad's read every year. They all knew that the last line of the poem was their signal to go to bed. So everyone stood up and said to Mom, "Merry Christmas to all, and to all good night," and then they ran upstairs to their rooms and jumped in bed. Tick-tock, tick-tock, Molly's heart thudded with every tick of the clock. She was waiting for it to be midnight. At midnight, she and Jill would perform their secret message. They would put Dad's box under the Christmas tree. Molly opened her eyes very wide. Her room was solidly dark, filled corner to corner with blackness. She rolled over on her side and looked at her glow-in-the-dark clock for the millionth time. 11:56. Only 4 minutes ago. She couldn't wait any longer. She sat up. Did her bed always creak so loudly? Slowly, carefully, she stood up and tiptoed to the door. Slowly, carefully, she opened it. Boom! A white shape bumped into her. Molly gasped, and the white shape giggled. It was Jill. She put a finger over her lips to signal no talking. Molly put her slippers on her feet, and they both went into the hallway. Then they followed their way down the stairs to absolute darkness, putting 2 feet on each step like unsteady babies. Molly didn't even breathe until they got to the kitchen. Jill headed to the closet to get her jacket. Molly grabbed her arm and whispered, "No, too noisy." All of a sudden, she felt sort of wobbly. She moved her hand down to Jill's arm and Jill squeezed it. Molly felt better. She opened the back door and went inside. The cold bit their skin. Quickly, they dashed across the driveway, up the stairs, and into the storage room. "This is kind of scary, isn't it?" Molly whispered. "Oh, I think it's fun," said Jill. "It's like a ghost story." Molly shivered. "Come on, let's hurry." They carried the box down the icy steps, across the driveway, through the kitchen, into the living room. They put it under the tree. There were several tempting boxes that had not been under the tree before. Molly pointed to them. Santa Claus has been here, she said. For some reason, that made both Jill and Molly burst into giggles. They grabbed the pillows from the sofa to muffle their laughter. When they finally quieted down, they crept up the stairs to the bed. Jill waved goodnight outside the door. Molly waved back. Mission accomplished, thought Molly. She curled up under the covers, drowsy and happy and very relieved. Mom, 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 was the next thing Molly heard. She opened her eyes. The sun was just coming up and her room was rosy. Mom, she heard Brad call as he thundered down the hall. Merry Christmas, get up. The McIntyres had a rule that no one could go downstairs to the Christmas tree until everyone was ready. Brad banged on Jill's door, then Molly's door, and then Ricky's door. When they were all together at the top of the stairs, Mrs. McIntyre smiled and said, Okay, go ahead. Everyone stampeded down the stairs. At the door of the living room, the stampede stopped suddenly. Hey, said Brad, what's that big box? Ricky rushed past to the tree. Mom, he said, it's from Dad, from Dad. Mrs. McIntyre's face went white. From... She whispered. She knelt down to the box and touched it. She looked up. It is. It's your father, but how? She looked over at Jill and Molly. They smiled. Mrs. McIntyre sat down on the floor. You too, she laughed. Why didn't you tell anyone about the box? Dad said not to, said Molly. Look, she pointed to Dad's message. Keep hidden, Mrs. McIntyre read. Just like your father. Always surprises. She hugged first Jill, then Molly. Molly could feel her trembling. Oh, what are we waiting for? Said Ricky. Let's open it. He tore the brown paper off the box and ripped open the lid. Ooh, said Brad. Look. The box was filled with green paper, lumps and odd shapes and sizes. Each lump was labeled. Ricky handed them out. One for Brad, one for Jill, one for Molly, one for Mom, one for me. Brad opened his present in no time. A canteen, he said. Then a soldier's hat. I guess Santa asked Dad to get them. Ricky had a scarf made from genuine parachute, the kind real pirates wore. Jill had a heather-colored skating hat. Much nicer than Dolores's, she said with satisfaction. Mom had buttery smooth gloves. She slid her hands in the gloves and smiled as she put out a small white note. She seemed to have to say anything. Oh, look, cried Molly. Everyone knelt down as she lifted hers out of a rustling tissue paper. Molly's gift was a doll, a beautiful doll with dark, shining hair and smiling blue eyes. Molly touched the doll's hair with one finger and traced the curve of her pink cheek. She was dressed in a nurse's uniform and hat like the one Molly had dreamed about. A smart red cape had covered her starched dress and tied her chin. Molly hugged her. The doll would be her best friend, her companion, and in adventures, the secret share of all her dreams. And when she played with her, Molly would always remember that Dad had chosen his doll for her. Even though he was far away, he still knew what would make Molly the happiest girl in the world. If only Dad could be there to see how happy his surprise made them all. Well, said Mrs. McIntyre suddenly, what time do you think it is? It's exactly 7:03, said Ricky, who never took off his watch. Mrs. McIntyre glanced at the white note in her pocket, then put on the bathrobe and put in her bathrobe pocket. Let's turn on the radio, she said. We can listen to the Christmas shows while we open the rest of our presents. Ricky flickered on the radio. Christmas music filled the room. Joy to the world, the singer sang. The music was drowned out with whoops of delight as Brad, Ricky, and Jill and Molly opened present after present. Molly was glad to see that not all her presents were so very practical. Jill gave her a glass ball that filled with snowflakes when she shook it, and Brad gave her corsage he made out of pine cones and a red ribbon. All too soon, the presents were soon unwrapped. Molly sat in a sea of crumpled wrapping paper, eating Christmas coffee cake. Brad insisted on drinking his juice out of the canteen. Ricky flung his scarf around his neck and pretended that he was the voice on the radio singing, May your days be merry and bright, And may all your Christmases be white. And a scratchy voice came on the radio, said, Merry Christmas. We've been broadcasting from the USO Christmas party in England. We have some servicemen here with messages for the folks back home. Here's an eager fellow. What's your name, Captain? I'm Captain James McIntyre, said a familiar voice. They all stopped and looked at the radio. I'd like to say Merry Christmas to all the Merry McIntyres. Jill, Ricky, Molly, Brad, and my wife, Helen. Molly held her doll very tight. I miss you all so very much, and I hope you have a wonderful Christmas full of surprises. And that was all. Other soldiers spoke, but Molly didn't hear them. She kept all the echo of Dad's voice. She never wanted it to fade. What he said was true. There was always surprises at Christmas. And that is the end of that story. Thanks for listening. See you later.